What current activity do you think is the biggest thing affecting salmon recovery in Alaska? Is it bycatch in the commercial fisheries, the mining companies, cross-border international politics, or maybe even climate change? What if there was something you could do today to help move the needle for recovering and protecting Alaska's salmon species? Stay tuned as we share a path forward with the Salmon State. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and conservationists than just about anyone out there. Tim Bristol, Executive Director of the SalmonState, is going to share his insights into almost 30 years of trying to protect salmon in Alaska. You're going to find out how logging was replaced by more sustainable activities in his home area, and how it's possible that 72 million sockeye just returned to Alaska recently, but we're still seeing big changes in Chinook runs, and what the connection is to Idaho's 4 lower Snake River dams. Plus, we're going to find out how they work with Indigenous people and how this is critical to sustaining these populations. Alaska may be my next home water. Here we go. Tim Bristol from salmonstate.org. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing well. Just staring out at the rain here in Southeast Alaska. Day.
Oh,
seems like
awesome.
100 of straight rain.
Has it been? Yeah. The cool thing is we're in Oregon, so we're south of you, but it feels like a very wet winter so far. Is that kind of how it's been for you guys, or is that just normal? Does it rain every day?
Well, it does, but you hope by January, it's more snow than rain. It's been incredibly warm.
Oh, it has. Like, what's the temperature? What's your average temperature out there?
I think today it's like 42 degrees. And, by this time of year, we should be in the 20s and low 30s, and we should have snow on the ground, and the skiers should be happy, but everybody's pretty miserable right now.
So you're feeling that's the ultimate. See, I live in the place where 42, 39 and rain is like the normal.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You guys are feeling what it feels like. I always feel like I've heard these stats. I'm not sure if they're true, that Alaska has like the highest suicide rate, and Oregon and Washington, all of them are close behind because of the weather. But do you find that the weather, the 39 and raining, is a lot worse than 20 and snow?
It is, but I live in Southeast Alaska, and it's a temperate rainforest, and we kind of do always go up and down below that freezing point. So if you're going to live here, you just have to embrace it. And honestly, I think it's never really bothered me very much, and I think some people think I'm really weird that it doesn't. But I don't know, living this close to the ocean and then having the forest directly adjacent to it, and you're kind of amphibious, and you either embrace that or
leave.
You should probably leave.
Or leave.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Good. Okay. Well, this is going to be great today. We are going to talk about, the Salmon State, and just kind of an update of what's going on, your organization. I know there's some big talk. I mean, Bristol Bay always comes up. I hear these things where it's, it's in the news and then it feels like it's gone and then it comes back. So we're going to talk about some of these big issues. And obviously Chinook, if we talk species, is a big species that I think gets everybody worried, because I think it's, again, back to that story where you would think that Alaska was, never going to have issues, but now we're seeing some with Chinook. So we're going to talk maybe that and some other topics. But first, before we get there, bring us back into your story. How did you get into this? How did you come to be working for Salmon State and getting into the conservation stuff?
Well, I've been doing conservation work for 30 years now in Alaska. Salmon State, we're 10 years old now. We're a staff of 13 here in Alaska. And as the name lays out, we're all about trying to ensure that Alaska remains the salmon state, the home of the last great wild salmon runs. And I came over from the Alaska program of Trout Unlimited and had a 10-year stint there, and it was great. And I just got to the point where I wanted to try something a little bit different, maybe cast the net a little bit wider. TU was amazing. Chris Wood, the big boss at TU, gave us all kinds of freedom to try all kinds of things, but we wanted to probably do a little bit more work with commercial fishermen and with Alaska Native communities and things like that. But we still work pretty closely with TU and a whole host of issues. And, it was all born a foundation that gave us money back in the day, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. They had a wild salmon ecosystem initiative, and we did some polling and some focus group work to try to figure out what really engages and animates Alaskans. And salmon was up there with education and employment. Like, the most important things to Alaskan salmon was right there, and ensuring that we had wild, abundant salmon for generations to come was it just pulled so high. It resonated so well with people across the political and social spectrum that we decided you just put it in the name and lay it out there and saying like, this is Alaska is a salmon state. And then our job is to sort of hold government, industry accountable and say like, hey, you're not living up to those standards that are required to ensure we remain the salmon state. So that's sort of our work, our mission.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And I feel like, again, there's, I go back, I remember hearing somebody talk about, the Pacific Northwest and like the old growth forests, and talking about how like Oregon, Washington had these old growth forests and now they're almost gone. But the fact that Oregon is old growth forest, right? That's what, without them, is it the same state? And it feels like with salmon, that's where you're laying your stake. Like without salmon, Alaska is not Alaska, right?
That's right.
That's kind of what you guys are saying. So how does that, there's a lot of topics here. I guess maybe let's start with high level, like right now, what are some of the big topics, issues you guys are working on? Are there just a whole bunch, or do you guys focus on a few?
Well, the place is so big. And the other reason we pick salmon is it's such a good indicator of ecosystem health, right? We have them from Ketchikan all the way to the North Slope, and that's a span of almost 1,000 miles and totally different ecosystem types. So some of the big issues for us, so here in Southeast Alaska, the Tongass National Forest is the biggest national forest in the country, and it is a old growth temperate rainforest. It's this archipelago, a forest of islands, huge salmon producer. There's 3 big producers that flow from interior British Columbia and out to the ocean at Ketchikan and Wrangell, and here in Juneau, the Chinooks, and Otaku, and we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then you have the rest of the Tongass National Forest on these big and small islands. And we are on the cusp of a new forest planning process. I think this is really the first time that we can have a plan that sort of dictates what you do in this huge 17 million acre forest that is not premised on large scale logging, right? We had a lot of logging here in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and even into the 90s. That's no longer the case. The economy and the culture here have just totally shifted away from it. It's sport and commercial fishing, recreation and tourism, and government are really the big drivers of the economy here. And I think we're at a point where some of that old lag of, we need to get back to the good old days of timber production and all the jobs it provided. I think that's finally sort of in the rearview mirror. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out with the new administration. I think there's going to be some pushback of, in trying to bring back some of the logging and road building. But I don't think that the communities here in the region, when they weigh in and talk to our congressional delegation, they'll say like, hey, we're not interested in going back to that kind of approach, that, we're just a different place now. So that's pretty exciting. And we're going to be leaning in really hard on that. The big rivers I just mentioned, the Yukon and the Stikine and the Taku, they are the major salmon drivers of this region. On our side of the border in the U.S., the mouths of these rivers are all in some kind of protected status, either wilderness, national monument, or a non-development land use designation as per the Forest Service. Over in British Columbia, it's a totally different story. The mining industry in Canada has renamed this transboundary region as the Golden Triangle. There's about 100 mining proposals at some stage of exploration or development, including a couple that are already in operation. And one of them we're concerned is already starting to leak from behind its tailings dam.
Oh, wow. So this is in Canada. So you've got, what you're saying is there's a lot of exploration in Canada, but in the U.S., there's not as much in this area?
Exactly. My coworker, Heather Hardcastle, who grew up commercial fishing on the Taku River just south of here. She says that we're sitting ducks, and in Canada, there's ticking time bombs. And I think that's a really, really accurate way of describing the situation. And what we're trying to do is create some kind of international framework where we can discuss what is and what isn't appropriate for shared rivers. So there's an agreement between the two countries, the Boundary Waters Treaty, that's supposed to govern these things. And it's never really been applied up here. So, and that's, this is a really bipartisan issue. Senator Dan Sullivan, Republican, Lisa Murkowski, Republican, and we'll see. We don't know. We just elected a new representative. They've all weighed in saying like, hey, we need a seat at the table when it comes to how we're going to manage these rivers. The problem right now, there isn't even a table. So that's what we're pushing for. So that's a big issue for us. That's we use this. We have kind of a sub brand, Salmon Beyond Borders. If you visit our website, you can also find Salmon Beyond Borders, and we have a whole essentially international effort dedicated to that. Bristol Bay and the long saga struggle to prevent the construction of the Pebble Mine. That's still something that's very important to us, and we work very closely with a whole host of groups on that. And that's ebbed and flowed throughout the years. Right now, we're in a good place. The Environmental Protection Agency put some safeguards in place. There's active litigation from the mining company in the state of Alaska that's challenging those decisions by EPA. And, you never know what the courts are going to decide.
Yeah. Why does the state of Alaska, I would think that with the salmon, like you said, salmon state, I mean, the bipartisan, everybody knows without it, you lose the salmon. I mean, that's not going to be good for Alaska. Why does the state of Alaska go against this situation? What's the benefit of that for them?
There's just this weird psychology up here, right? Where we had a governor back in the day, Wally Hickel. He essentially said to the United States, he said, "Let us make our own mistakes," right? we oftentimes, just don't want to listen to the lessons.
Yeah. That's why people live, right? That's the thing about Alaska, is that people love Alaska because you are not people aren't telling you what to do, right? That's kind of part of that Alaska mentality.
Exactly. And, the governor, Mike Dunleavy, is in place right now. He's just really pro-development no matter what. And I think he kind of thinks this, I think he thinks of it in a more of an ideological than a practical perspective, right? He doesn't like the federal government telling Alaska what to do. And so he kind of recoils against any action from the Environmental Protection Agency. That flies in the face of the fact that the original petition to do this work was authored by a bunch of tribal governments from the region. About 85% of the people who live in the Bristol Bay region are Indigenous. And then they were joined by the commercial fishing fleet, which is still a very important economic driver out there. And then, all the sport fishermen and lodge owners and guides. And then frankly, things that are kind of emerging like bear viewing operations all weighed in. It was an amazing sort of across the board push for protection. And, our governor is definitely in the minority, and I would submit on the wrong side of this one. So we'll see how it plays out. I will say that at the federal level, we had President Obama took the first steps. President Trump was the one who actually rejected the permit applications from the mining company via the Army Corps of Engineers. And then outgoing President Biden kind of sealed the deal. So, we're guardedly optimistic that this is something that cuts across the kind of the traditional lines of battle, right? So
that's great. That's great to hear. So, I mean, it seems like with Alaska, like you said, it's so big. There's so much going on. It seems like, always the question, especially people listening now, where do you start? How can we help? What can we do? Can you give us the Chinook from your take? Like, what is the current status? How are we looking? What's going on? What's the future hold for Chinook?
Yeah, I mean, you compare and contrast it, right? Bristol Bay a couple of years ago had its biggest sockeye salmon run ever. It was 72 million fish came back. It's astounding. The experts think that maybe was the biggest run ever because they can kind of go back into some of the sediment beds at the bottom of these lakes and sort of carbon date and kind of reconstruct runs. It's fascinating. And they think that run was maybe the biggest run ever. It's clearly sockeye are a winner right now in climate change. Chinook, on the other hand, are in really, really big trouble throughout the range in Alaska. We don't have any sport fishing on the Kenai River, the location of the largest sport caught king salmon ever. And we were totally shut down from king salmon fishing here in Southeast Alaska almost the entire year. They've closed the Yukon River to all harvest, including for, customary and traditional use by native people for 7 years. So the entire life cycle of a Chinook, it's really dire. And there's a lot of different factors at play. At least that's what researchers think. Everything from when out migrating Chinook smolts get to the ocean, the food that they need to have almost immediately is not there. Maybe that's due to some, shifting things with climate and water temperature and that kind of stuff. There's, the thing that a lot of people don't often talk about, but is clearly a big factor, is predation by marine mammals. University of Washington thinks that killer whales are eating up to 2 million mature Chinook each year, sort of Pacific Rim wide. So, which is incredible, and if I was a killer whale, if I was an orca, that's what I would eat.
I'd take the biggest. Yeah. That's the thing about the Chinook. They're the biggest salmon out there, right? So they're the best food. If you're going to pick a salmon, you might as well take a Chinook.
Yeah. And then, so so, there's it's really complex. I will say that the thing that we focused on, because we feel like we have some control over it over in the short and midterm, is to try to reduce the amount of intercept of Chinook, particularly heading back to Western Alaska rivers by industrial scale fishing boats, trawlers, most of which are based out of Seattle. And they haul these big nets behind their boats, some 300 feet long, and they essentially catch everything in the ocean. They're targeting pollock, which goes into filet of fish sandwiches, and surimi, fake crab, and everything else is essentially thrown overboard.
No kidding.
Yeah. So far this year, it's been about 32,000 Chinook that have been observed, recorded, what they call bycatch in these trawl fisheries. And it's become really controversial up here. It's one of those issues that sort of cuts across sort of the old lines of demarcation. And you see Alaska Native people and resident sport anglers and guide services and commercial fishermen groups that don't really agree on much of anything else, saying that we need to rein this in. So that's been kind of one of the other big issues that we've been working on. And do we think that is like the thing that's going to solve or the Chinook situation? No, but it is one that we have some control over.
FishHound Expeditions offers world-class fly fishing right off Alaska's incredible road system. From monster rainbow trout to feisty Arctic grayling, you'll chase big species in the stunning landscape. Whether you're a seasoned angler or just starting out, their expert guides ensure an unforgettable adventure. Book your trip today before spots fill up and experience Alaska's diversity like never before. Check them out right now. That's fishhoundexpeditions.com. What are the numbers of Chinook historically? I mean, do we have an idea of, or even say 30 years ago, what the numbers were like? Because this has been the decline has been, this didn't just happen last year, right? This has been slowly happening.
Yeah. On rivers like the Kenai, I don't have them off the top of my head, but, they have counted fish on the Kenai for a long time. And we're way below what they term as the optimal escapement goal. And some of the rivers here, like the Taku, which is a pretty significant Chinook producer, we've had some of the worst years ever on the Taku, like just a few thousand fish. And I think like the escapement goal for the Taku is 26 to 30,000 or something like that. Even the Nushagak River out in Bristol Bay, which has, been one that sort of kind of stood out for quite a few years, is starting to suffer some significant declines. I don't think they've met their escapement goals on the Nushagak for the last few years. So yeah, we're at a historically low level of returning Chinook.
For Chinook. And then everything else. Do you have a feel for, all the other species? How do you do that, right? How do you know how all these other species in all these other areas with these tens of hundreds of millions of acres?
Yeah. I will say that the Alaska Department of Fish and Game spends an enormous amount of time and money and throws a lot of personnel in trying to actually count fish on a lot of systems, right? And so they have escapement goals for a lot of the big producers. Like I said, sockeye seem to be doing really well. Bristol Bay, we've had tremendous runs. That same river just south of where I'm, talking to you today from, the Taku had their best sockeye run in over a decade. Chinook or coho are all over the place. That's one place. If I had my way and had lots of money, I would ask, or I would require the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to, start really doing a better job of managing coho. We just assume they're there, and we don't really have escapement goals for coho. I've heard that South Central has had some terrible coho years the last few years. So in around Anchorage and the Kenai Peninsula region, the Susitna River drainages. Here in Southeast, it went from good on the north end of this, because this region alone, the Tongass, is about 250, 275 miles long. So on the north end, it was pretty good. And on the south end, I guess there was pretty spectacular coho fishing. So that's all over the map. I think one of the things that really helps the Southeast region is the fact that I think there's probably over 10,000 coho systems in the Tongass National Forest. Some are really small, but that diversity of the portfolio, I think, really helps. And then, chum salmon, pretty okay down here. Western Alaska, it's again, disaster or close to at levels. And back to the trawl fishery last year, the trawlers caught about 500,000 Chinook during their operations. A lot of those were hatchery fish from the from Japan and Russia and Korea, but about 70,000 of those chums were bound for Western rivers. And, you'll hear the trawl industry will say, well, that's just a small percentage. And, people who live in these communities that have caught chum for thousands of years will say, well, 70,000 is a lot more than zero. So it's a mixed bag. There's a lot to be concerned about. There's a lot to keep us busy.
Yeah. Are you the steelhead? You're the salmon state, but are you also the steelhead state, or is that one that doesn't, you don't have enough
No,
time?
definitely, but that's a whole, as you know, I mean,
Yeah.
the steelheaders are a whole other species. And we work with so many different sectors. I mean, I lived in Homer, Alaska for 10 years, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the Anchor River, which is just north of Homer. And it's a great little steelhead system. It's one of the more northerly steelhead systems. And that one that one seems to be doing okay, although it's a non-glaciated system. So there's concerns about warming waters. And then here in Southeast, Trout Unlimited has a pretty cool program where they're trying to identify systems that they believe have steelhead in them that are not in what we call the anadromous waters catalog. And they're finding new systems that have never been identified officially as having steelhead in them. And we've got a guy here in Juneau who's got the dream job of wandering around streams in the spring looking for steelhead.
Oh, wow.
It's hard work, but someone's got to do it. And then, some of the big systems, the Taku and that, there's definitely a significant steelhead run. It's kind of mysterious, though, that I don't think anybody really knows how many are there. So, but, especially Southeast Alaska is definitely steelhead country. And there's quite a few opportunities. Most of the runs are pretty small. They're not long river systems, right? Because they're island-based river systems.
That's right. Yeah, we've done some episodes recently on that, so this is good. Okay, and so what is it? Just looking again, maybe take us back to the salmon state. What is as you look out? It's a good time, right? Early January, February. What are some projects you're looking out that you guys are going to be really digging into this year, next year?
I think it's approaching the Trump administration about really kind of pushing Canada to come to the negotiating table on those transboundary rivers that we talked about. It's trying to put some sideboards or, pour some concrete in around this draft forest plan. That's, we want a forest plan that's based mostly on salmon, right? Like, look, if you take care of salmon, you take care of so many things. And that's sort of our platform, our position moving forward when it comes to management of this big national forest. There'll probably be a little bit of logging, but it's got to be done smart. It's got to be done the right way. And the wood that does come from the forest, hopefully will go to support local businesses, not get exported into around to Asia, which has been a lot of times what's happened in the past. We have a state legislative session that's going to be starting here soon. And we're always trying to push some proactive legislation dealing with protecting water quality and making sure that some really important salmon systems have proper zoning and setbacks when it comes to development. So it's just a whole host of issues, and it's all playing out in a place that has 3 million lakes, more coastline than the rest of the United States. It's an enormous landscape. And then I think probably the other big one for us is to try to see if we can slow down the rate of bycatch associated with those trawlers I was talking about.
Yeah, the trawlers. Yeah, the bycatch is a big thing. How do you? I guess that kind of goes back to the partnerships, collaborations. Maybe what's your plan to get there? Maybe you could talk about a little bit about maybe some collaborations, some successes you've had over the years.
Yeah, I think really trying to use the model that kind of evolved, I'd say pretty much organically out in Bristol Bay, right? So you have the largest sockeye salmon producing system in the world, and also some of the best rainbow fishing on the planet. And all of a sudden, it was like the early 2000s, there was this rumor happening that they'd found one of the world's largest gold and copper deposits. And I think people in the region at first were like, well, this might be a way to diversify the economy. And then a few of us started to kind of dig into it a little bit, and then reached out to some mining engineers and others that had experience and knowledge. And they were like, oh my God, you look at the size of the proposed excavation, the amount of standing and flowing water. And we were told pretty quickly by some people in the mining industry that you have to stop this. This is going to be a catastrophe. And then, over time, this weird, interesting alliance evolved of, I was working for Trout Unlimited and started talking to a lot of the lodge owners in the region and, their whole business model. It's interesting because a lot of those lodges, salmon is part of it, but it's really about trout. It's really about rainbow trout fishing. That's sort of how they make their money. So they were on board. And then the commercial fishing industry and out in Bristol Bay, you still have, several thousand boats, 32-foot gill netters that are working for about 6 weeks to harvest. And sometimes they take up to half of that sockeye run. And that's proven to be about what you can do and be sustainable. And that's almost $1 billion a year industry. And then, like I mentioned at the outset, you have 32 Alaska Native communities in a region about the size of Wisconsin. And they have been there, literally, almost forever, 10,000 years or so. And, they make up the most of the population. And through a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck, a really interesting, powerful coalition came forward, and we all kind of push for the same thing. And I think that's sort of the model we try to use when it comes to, preventing something really, I would submit, dumb from occurring, or, hopefully, pushing for something progressive, visionary, protective through the legislative process. None of it's easy, but that seems to be the recipe that works better than anything else, is try to figure out what you all agree on and spend all your time in that area of agreement. And,
Right. And for Bristol Bay, it seems like, I guess it's a little clearer, right? On Bristol Bay, you have this pebble mine, right? And it's like, okay, we got to stop that. But I guess the other issues, like you said, are not quite as clean, whether that's international stuff or the Chinook, which really, it sounds like we don't really know exactly. We know there's a lot of things going, but we can't just say, okay, if we do that, that'll fix things, right?
Yeah, no, it's really difficult with Chinook. That's when it's just, you got to do everything you possibly can to apply a precautionary principle or a conservation first approach. And, all these things, right? It's like all the things in society, when you take things away from people, the reaction isn't always good. And, people here have been used to being able to essentially do what they want, and always had healthy harvestable levels of salmon, including Chinook. And it's a real wake up call. And, the reactions kind of run the spectrum from to resign to sad to angry to whatever.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, no, totally. Well, this is, any other, as you look here, what are, other big topics that we're missing here you want to highlight? I know you have a lot going on, but just to give people a little taste of some of the other issues around.
Well, there's an emerging discussion about hatchery production and what that means. And it's not one that we've necessarily dove head first into yet, but, there's a lot more talk about some of the research showing that hatchery fish may be competing with wild fish when it comes to food, especially pink salmon production. There's the issue of straying. Where do these hatchery fish go? I think there's always been sort of this faith that fish come out of a hatchery, they imprint on the water where they were, in their net pen for a while before they were released, and that's where they go back to. But I think we all know that salmon survival strategy is to stray. And I think we need to start spending a little more time focused on where are these hatchery fish going? Are they indeed going back to where they were released, or are they fanning out into other wild systems, and what are the impacts on those wild systems? Then there's a pretty robust restoration effort. Here in Southeast Alaska, there was quite a bit of road building and logging that happened in the past. And there's a pretty strong program going on via a lot of different nonprofits and tribes, and then the Forest Service to fix up some of the things that were messed up. And that's really kind of gained a lot of momentum. And I think one of the things that's really good is in these rural communities where you have, folks that used to be in the timber industry, heavy equipment operators, people are really skilled with tradespeople and really skilled with their hands, are finding out that this is some pretty rewarding work. And, I think our responsibility is to make sure they're well compensated, and, they have multi-years of employment doing this restoration work. And I think that's starting to really happen, is really coming to fruition. So that's been a really positive development as well.
Yeah. Wow. And what is, for people listening now, what are the takeaways that they can do? What would you say somebody wants to have an impact, help out? What do you tell people?
Well, we're constantly putting stuff out through all our social media channels where, people, are encouraged to take action. We put out a little kind of news and issue roundup every Friday. Our communications director, she's just awesome. She works really hard. And, we try not to just talk about ourselves. We try to highlight issues that we think are important to anyone who cares about salmon and the people who depend upon them. So, you can sign up for that. That's a pretty good resource. some of the other groups that we work really closely with, like Trout Unlimited, I mentioned it. I imagine a lot of your listeners are really familiar with trout. They do a bunch of really cool work up here. So I think just, checking out our social media channels and going to the website every once in a while and seeing what piques your interest. And we definitely have a lot of requests out there for people to take action. And then, and I think consider coming to visit Alaska, do your research and figure out, where you want to spend your hard-earned money. I mean, it can be daunting if you haven't been up here before. Figure out what you want to do. I mean, if I had my way, I'd spend all of every fall, every September would be in Bristol Bay.
In Bristol Bay, yeah.
It's just unbelievable. And then, I think and also when you're shopping, if you see wild Alaska sockeye salmon for sale, really consider buying it. It's sustainable. It puts money in the pocket of small boat family fishermen who, in a lot of cases, have really kind of stood up and took action to protect the resource. And, I think that in my experience, having done this for quite a long time, if you don't have, people in these communities, especially when you're pretty remote, and if they don't have a way to, make a living, they can be pushed to make some decisions that I'll just call them hasty decisions, maybe not even like, the decision they want to make, but they're forced to, right? There's a proposal for a mine on the Chilkat River, which is another major salmon producer in Haines, Alaska, at the northern end of the Inside Passage. And, the price for salmon and the abundance of salmon has been down. And a lot of commercial fishermen up there, gill netters, are, saying like, I might just anchor the boat and go work at this proposed mine. And I don't think a lot of them really are excited about it due to the potential for, damage to the Chilkat River. But, we need to make sure that people have those choices.
Yeah, right. Well, and I'm looking at a couple of issues here on, this is the take action on your website, salmonstate.org. And you've got, basically there's 6, kind of stop wasteful bycatch, defend the West Sioux, defend transboundary rivers we talked about, support Southeast communities, tourism, reform AIDEA fisheries meetings. So let's walk through those. Have we talked about all those? We talked about bycatch. What about the Sioux? Now, that's a Susitna?
Yeah, so the West Susitna. So the Susitna River is the 4th largest salmon producer in the state, and it kind of drains the Alaska range. So Denali, everybody, and Denali National Park. And there's a proposal to build an industrial access road through sort of the western part of this drainage. It's totally wild now and really productive salmon producer. The thing that's interesting about the Susitna is some people think it may be the most productive anadromous river in the world if you include the Smelt or the Hooligan Run. They have a huge amount of, hooligan that come up there in the spring and just massive. So it's always kind of fun to throw it out there because, we talk about salmon and trout, but like there's all these other species.
And what are hooligan? What's that species?
Hooligan's a smelt, sometimes also called candlefish, because
candlefish,
it can run down the oil and it's,
Yeah. So these are smelt. So you have a giant smelt run.
Yep. Enormous. And this industrial access road will probably end up being private. It's being paid for with public money. And it's being used to access a gold mine that was prospected by a Canadian company. And then a lot of the additional funding is coming through this entity called the Alaska Industrial Export Development Authority, which it takes public Alaskan money and invests in projects. A lot of them are speculative. I have derisively referred to ADA as the bank of broken dreams or the bank of last resort. If you can't get your funding anywhere else, you go to these, folks that are appointed by the governor and they sit on about $1 billion of Alaskans' money and they kind of invest in these mega projects.
Gotcha. And what's ADA stand for? What's that?
The Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority.
Gotcha. And that's a government agency?
It's a state agency that was created by the state legislature and over the years has really kind of
become private,
grown and changed. Yeah. And so that's become a real controversial issue there in South Central Alaska. And, a lot of sport fishing guides are really concerned, because that's some of the best, wildest salmon and trout fishing within a close reach of Anchorage, but not drivable. So it's still a pretty remote, incredible experience. And, I think a lot of us are asking, it's like, who's going to benefit and who's going to lose and, who's paying for it. So, yeah, that's another one of those issues. There's a really interesting cross-section of Alaskans working on it. There's a little local group called the Susitna Rivers Coalition. There's Wild Salmon Center.
Okay.
Yeah, Wild Salmon Center out of Portland. They have an office up here, and they've been heavily involved in that. they've actually been one of the real leaders on that, just done tremendous work. A lot of sport fishing guides, like I mentioned, and then just, kind of local residents that live off the grid out there that are just don't want to see their way of life change. So yeah, that's another big one. And yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you got, that. And then I think we talked transboundary and then fisheries. And then what about the community's recreation tourism now? That's just basically what you said, come up there and experience Alaska and like support Alaska. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. And, I think we love it when people maybe spend a little bit more money and a little more time and get a little bit off the beaten track, maybe don't do the cruise ship thing. Nothing against cruise ships. Well, I don't know. We had 1.6 million visitors in Juneau last year. Maybe got a little much.
Oh, right. Yeah. People are getting off. They got off their boat for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Hang out.
Yeah. Although there's a pretty cool excursion you can do here in Juneau where you go fly fishing for 4 or 5 hours and get on a plane and that gives folks a nice taste. But yeah, at least, come up and experience Alaska and leave a few dollars here and support local businesses. Cause, I think that's just a really important part of ensuring that Alaska remains a salmon state is have people who are caring, committed stakeholders who can afford to live in these places and, raise their families here.
Exactly. I'm looking at now, I'm on kind of the media part of the website and it's got My Turn by Tim Bristol. Is that like a blog you're writing?
That was in response to someone who, tried to accuse us of being a bunch of shadowy outsiders that are trying to ruin Alaska. And, that just comes with the territory sometimes, especially in a state that's, fairly pro-development. I took real umbrage to that since literally half of our employees, there's 13 of us, and half of us were born here. I was not, but, including 2 Alaska Native women who literally can trace their history back like millennia. And we have a few former commercial fishermen on staff and a former sport fishing guide. So, I've been here 33 years now. So we have deep roots and they're getting deeper every day. And so we just decided to push back. And yeah, that's just the latest, in the push and pull of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just part of it. Do you guys do regular like board meetings? Are there places could somebody follow, what you have coming up this year? You mentioned like getting on the email list. It sounds like that's one good place to do it.
Yeah. We try to do this weekly roundup and kind of let you know what's going on. And we've tried to host a series of what we call Salmon Stories. So just do profiles of people that we think are interesting that, have some kind of strong connection to salmon. And, we've had everything from sport fishing guides to commercial fishermen to Alaska Native elders to.
Oh, cool. So this is kind of like a podcast, essentially, a little video.
Yeah. Yeah. We've kicked around the idea of a podcast and we realized how much work it is.
Yeah.
How much time it takes. So we haven't gone.
You should still do it. It's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been just sort of like going out and interviewing people and videoing them and then transcribing their words and voices and getting that out there through our Salmon Stories. And that's been really cool.
Oh, cool. Is that on, so you can see these on YouTube, or where can you watch the stories?
Yeah. I think if you go there on the website, it'll say like Salmon Stories and it can direct you to places where you can find.
Love it. We'll put a link out to that too, so we can take a look at some of these. Yeah, I see them now. You've got trawlers. You got kind of all the issues on. This is good. So what about you? What's your, are you a big angler, or what are you doing out there?
I'm a passionate angler. I would not say I'm a great angler. I mean, that was when I worked at TU, man. It was like,
you had to be an angler.
I was, but like, holy cow. I mean, there's so many people that are so good.
Yeah. Are you, is this like fly, conventional, everything?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely would prefer to fly fish. It was great. Like this fall, we had a really good run of coho here, right in Gastineau Channel in front of Juneau. And, I really focused on fly fishing for coho, and I was just as productive as the guys ripping their hooks through the water. And it felt really good. And yeah, I haven't been out in Bristol Bay the last couple of years. And it's just killing me, like just being out there and trying to fish for rainbows in the fall. It's just amazing.
Yeah. That's when the rainbows are getting big after they've been eating a lot and all that stuff.
Yeah. And these big sockeye salmon runs years. I mean, it's been the number of big rainbows they've been catching it's just incredible.
Oh, right. Because the more salmon, the more food there is for the rainbows. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah. I guess I can throw a fly, but I learned to fly fish up here. So I'm, matching the hatch is like whatever phase of the
food,
the salmon,
eggs or flesh.
So it's like bigger stuff. It's, nymphing with beads and then throwing big heavy stuff in the fall. And then, going to like a stream in Colorado, and I still have a lot to learn.
Exactly. Right. What about the groups up there? You mentioned a few of them. Obviously, TU's up there. You got the West Susitna Coalition. Are there a lot of other groups smaller up there, or is that kind of the bulk of the groups?
There's a pretty robust conservation community. I think when you think about groups that focus on salmon and sort of the intersection between conservation and fishing, Trout Unlimited's Alaska program, SalmonState, that defend the West Sioux Coalition was made up of a lot of folks that are really deeply committed and embedded in that region. And then the Wild Salmon Center, all the great work they do there in the Pacific Northwest. They have a really super solid operation here in Alaska, run by a woman named Emily Anderson, and they've really established themselves as a really important force here in Alaska. And then, I think those are some of the groups. And then there's some that kind of are more in the commercial fishing space and the marine space, the Alaska Marine Conservation Council and things like that. But yeah, that sort of intersection between like terrestrial and ocean and salmon and recreational angling, I'd say that's kind of the main groups.
That's it. What is you mentioned this earlier on the wild. So eating or buying, supporting wild salmon. That's kind of interesting because it's a little bit on the surface, a little bit you think like, oh, why would I want to kill wild fish, right? But it's not that. The fact is you're saying, maybe describe that a little bit. Why is it more important to eat wild Alaskan sockeye than other fish in the market?
Well, I would submit they're still really well managed. And I think the abundance of those runs sort of illustrates that. We're at, close to peak sockeye production, at least in Bristol Bay and a few other places. You end up supporting small community family businesses. And I think the longer I do this work, if there isn't a way for people to make a sustainable living in these places, they're driven to some tough choices. And then, I think it does take some vigilance and some research to make sure that you're not being sold a false bill of goods. But I can say with great certainty that Alaskan commercially harvested coho and sockeye are good choices when it comes to, feeling good about what you're eating.
Yeah, because they're managed. And so they're managed. That's the interesting part, right? Because there's a lot, 72 million sockeye coming back. They're managing as part of it. But there's also just the Chinook, the fact that I'm guessing there was mismanagement too. But there's also, like we said, other things going on. Do you think sockeye, coho, maybe just to take sockeye, do you think there's a possibility in the future that the same thing could happen? And it's like, whoa, or are we seeing, is there a history? I'm just trying to get that thing like Chinook. It seems like, okay, we're here now. No more Kenai Chinook, no more fishing. It sounds like it's been a 20-year thing of getting to this point. Do you think these other species have that potential too to fall in the same trap?
I mean, they absolutely do. And then I think really the only thing you can do is to ensure the habitat and the water quality is good, right? Yeah. I mean, because salmon are resilient, and you look at, this better than me. There's examples all over the place. It's interesting. On the Snake River Dam issue, we're actually really tightly linked to that because
you are.
Yeah, a lot of those fall Snake River Chinook would come to Southeast Alaska for part of their life cycle.
Oh, wow.
And, we've seen dramatic reductions in harvest by the commercial fleet, the trawlers in particular, in response to the listing of those fall Snake River Chinook. So, I don't know. You kind of think, and I've only been on the periphery of it, but I've been able to talk with a lot of people down there, and you look at all that habitat in Idaho that those salmon can't get to, and you wonder what would happen. The Klamath, I guess, the preliminary results are incredible, right?
I know. Yeah. What are the results of Klamath showing is there already results showing the benefit of what they did?
Well, I guess from what I've read that there's already Chinook, making it all the way to Oregon.
That's amazing. And then the snake dams is obviously probably no bigger issue, although those you would think would kind of be next, but it's been years, 30 years people have been talking about them. And, none of these things are easy. That's the challenge. But what you're saying is these Chinook historically would go up to the upper Snake, they'd migrate out, and then they would grow in that Southeast Alaska near where you are, and then turn around and come back.
Yeah, they kind of spent some time in the Gulf of Alaska. I actually worked on that issue for a short period of time years ago, and the federal caucus came to Southeast Alaska when they were really thinking about, his first big push to breach those 4 lower Snake dams. And there were these older gentlemen in Petersburg, a commercial fishing community in central Southeast Alaska. And this guy told this amazing story where he would go out in a rowboat with his little brother. They were like teenagers, and their parents just let him go out in a rowboat at the south end of one of the big islands here. and one would row and the other one would man the gurneys as they trolled. And
Oh,
you know,
wow.
you could row this boat at this dory at essentially a speed that was perfect for catching king salmon. And they were pretty sure they were catching fall snicker or chinook. They were enormous. And there was a time of year, and they kind of consistently found them year after year feeding in this one spot. And, it was kind of a really evocative story of, something that was lost. And then this guy, this guy was like in his late 70s, but he essentially said that they just watched their, ability to catch those fish vanish as those dams went in on the snake.
Right in the 50s or whenever that was.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's anecdotal stuff, but I think those are powerful stories, that I think we need to make sure get captured and repeated. And, that's the thing with Chinook, right? Is they spend so much time in the open ocean and they range widely. So there's a lot of things that can eat them, a lot of things that they can interact with their survival. And we're all kind of stuck with this, right? None of us are blameless. We all got a role to play.
Yeah, we all part of it. What is just quickly on the climate change? I know this is probably doesn't get any bigger than this issue, but do you guys talk about that? Are you meeting and discussing climate change? Like, what can we do? What's going on?
Well, we definitely do. I mean, it definitely hanging over everything and affecting everything. We've kind of actively pushed for policies that's to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas we're pushing into the atmosphere. And, we try to use salmon as a way to sort of discuss some of those bigger issues. They can be so hard to get your arms wrapped around. And I think, we're trying to find ways to talk to people where it's something beyond you're going to get less and you're going to pay more, which I think is often the case when you're talking about climate change. And it might be true, but sometimes it's a hard pill for people to swallow. So, but it absolutely, I mean, it definitely flows through all the different issues and we work on in all the conversations and discussions.
Yeah, exactly. What is I guess I want to kind of start to take it out of here and maybe we can talk about the indigenous people. I think the Klamath Dam, from what I've heard, that was a big part. Like, I think the reason that went forward, they were down there really, pushing for all that and it actually happened. And I've heard relationships of indigenous people in Canada is different. What's it like in Alaska? What's it like for you working with the people there that basically, we, essentially it's really this crazy thing, right? Because you think of the history and I've even heard some crazy stories about like what the U.S. did and, to the indigenous people, essentially extirpated almost, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your take on it now? And what can people learn from like people now that maybe aren't around a lot of indigenous people? What can they maybe think about moving out of this today?
It's the most interesting and rewarding part of the work is to work with these communities. They have these just unbelievably long, uninterrupted histories in these places. The way sort of Alaska Native rights and title evolved here is a little bit differently. There was an act in 1971 that created Native corporations, believe it or not. So you have these for-profit corporations that own 44 million acres of land, and they're, required by law to generate revenue dividends for their shareholders, their tribal enrollees. And so that sometimes leads to, kind of like an interesting tug of war, not only within the indigenous communities, but the greater Alaskan community between development and preservation. And sometimes you'll have a native corporation that is pushing development, sometimes even development that we would submit is not great for wild salmon. And then over the last couple of decades, you've seen a reemergence of the tribal governments. This legislation was supposedly supposed to extinguish sort of Indian country, the land over which Alaska Native tribes would manage, but I think that was overstated. So you've seen a reemergence of tribal governments. And they're in the middle of or in a leadership position on almost every single issue about conserving salmon, restoring salmon habitat.
All right. They're at the table.
Yeah. Not only at the table now, they're like in the center of all the conversations. And frankly, from a conservation perspective, we're in way better shape because of that.
Right. Exactly. That's the thing. You want them at the table. That's an important part of this.
Yeah. And also brings a very different perspective. Sometimes, we think we've got things figured out. We talk in 1 and 2 and 5 year timeframes, and they're like, yeah. You need to think a little.
I find that too. I find that most people think of it as their lifetime. It's like, okay, I've lived here for 50 years and I've seen it all. But actually, no. Let's go back 5,000 years.
Yeah, exactly. My coworker Dan said he was sitting down with an Alaska Native gentleman elder a few months ago. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I really appreciate the work you're doing. You can take care of it for a while until we're ready to take it all back.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's eventually in the bigger picture, right? That's interesting because nature will find a way. You know what I mean? Like there might be some species that disappear, but ultimately, I mean, nature does find a way. That's like the natural evolution. It's a kind of weird to think because we're humans in the middle of this, like making things harder, but it's always trying to recover, right? And probably will in some form. There'll probably be some different, maybe Chinook, maybe they do disappear, but there will probably be some other life history or species or something that changes it. It's kind of a crazy thing to think about because it's way bigger than us. It's way bigger than our lifetime, right? Do you guys look at it? I guess maybe we could leave it here is when you guys look out, are you looking out 100 years, 200 years, thousands of years?
I mean, we try, but I will say there is a sense of urgency, especially with Chinook, right? Like, I think we do look at 100 years and there's two ways of looking at it. It's like, well, given a chance, nature probably can and will heal itself. But that said, with climate change and the number of people on the planet, I would hate to, feel like we didn't do everything we possibly could to make sure that 2 or 3 generations forward, kids are saying like, I wish I could have caught or eaten or even seen a Chinook. I mean, I don't want to be in that. I mean, I don't want to know. I want to be able to say that I did everything I possibly could to ensure that didn't happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I mentioned, Adam at the start about FishHound. I mean, he said that too. He's got a daughter. And I have a couple of little daughters as well. And it's the same thing. Yeah, you want them to be able to experience what we're experiencing in our lifetime, in their lifetimes.
Yep.
So I think you got to focus there and have that outer view too, the bigger picture to say, hey, we're going to do everything we can right now. But as things change, we're going to adapt and do whatever we have to do. It's kind of a crazy conversation. How do you stay, this is always the question I have is how do you stay positive? How do you keep it positive? Are you always positive? Or are you more of a pessimistic? How do you look at all this?
I think I'm more like I'm positive, but darkly sarcastic. It's probably, I think, sarcasm, humor. I think humor is really important. Remember to laugh at yourself and kind of laugh at the circumstance every once in a while. And then honestly, one of the best things about here is you just can step outside and be in a pretty cool place very quickly. And that, I got to say, you get stuck in front of your computer in an office and stupid phone calls, Zoom calls and things like that. But it's
podcasts.
Podcasts are great. But but then, just even just going and wetting the line for an hour or taking a walk. And it's amazing how restorative that is. And
God, can you do that right now? Like right at your door? Do you have streams within nearby walking distance?
Yeah. I mean, this time of year, it's not real fishable, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, when's the best time so we're talking June, and what's the town? What actual town are you in?
I'm in Juneau.
Yeah, you're in Juneau. So what is Juneau? Because Juneau's obviously a huge hub. I mean, describe that a little bit. What is Juneau like? How does it compare to, say, maybe not Anchorage, but any other bigger town in Alaska?
Yeah, it's funny. It acts a lot bigger than it is. It's 30,000 people, but you can't drive here, right? So you either have to fly in here or take a ferry.
Right.
So it's kind of it's really self-contained. We have a hospital. There's a symphony, for God's sakes.
Oh, wow.
There's an ice rink here. There's a ski area. It's pretty amazing. And it becomes this huge turn. It's the state capital. So there'll be a lot of activity here in another couple of weeks when the legislature convenes. Then we have just this exploding amount of cruise ship-based tourism, 1.6 million people. But you can go 15 miles away and you're on the Admiralty Island National Monument, Kootenai Wilderness. It's a 1,000 square mile protected area. It was actually designated by President Carter and, subsequently passed by Congress. There's 1,000 brown bears on the island. There's unbelievable steelhead, salmon, Ballyvarden fishing, super wild, really good deer hunting in the fall. You can go south, you can go north, you can get away from people so quickly. And that's just incredible.
That's Alaska.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Southeast Alaska.
Southeast and really, I mean, seems like the joke kind of is with the Anchorage, right? Anchorage is really not quite like Alaska, but everywhere else you can just walk out your door and go for it and nobody's there.
Yeah. I mean, the distance grows a little bit every year. The saying is Anchorage is only a 20 or 30 minute drive from Alaska.
Yeah, that's the saying. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. And what about you? One final one for, we're going to be heading up there. Actually, like I said, we're going to be heading up, hitting the road system, going into Anchorage, driving. We're going to be probably also hitting Togiak, that area as well. But where are you heading? If you're thinking, okay, a place in Alaska I haven't been to yet that's on your bucket list, where would that be?
I'd love to go out and try to fish for steelhead and the Aleutians.
Oh, the Aleutians. Yeah.
Yeah. Heavy weather, I mean, that's just so cool to be out there.
So crazy too, isn't it? The Aleutians are this island chain of that you could see it when you put up Google Maps. I mean, it is amazing to see the Gulf of Alaska and that huge drop and where the Aleutians are.
Yep.
And it actually goes all the way to Russia almost, doesn't it? That chain.
Almost. I mean, yeah, I can't remember what the flight time. I mean, they go from Adak, which is way out on the end, back to Anchorage. I mean, I think it's like a 2.5 hour flight in the jet.
Adak, yeah. And there's Attu Station.
Yeah.
So you're saying, find a little island, like you said, a little stream, kind of like Southeast. I know we had an episode we did in Southeast for steelhead, and it sounded like a lot of those are these little tiny streams that just have,
Yeah, I was away from Southeast for 10 years and lived in Homer up in South Central. I guess the other thing I'd love to do is like sort of the central part of the Tongass has a significant number of those small steelhead systems, and like a spring trip, maybe hit like 5 or 6 or 7 of those from a boat. If money wasn't any object, I mean, that's like super bucket list. And then, I've been there a bunch of times, but it's really hard to stay away from Bristol Bay in the fall. I mean, those rainbows they're freakish. They're also just like so vicious and so powerful.
Yeah. They're like getting that last thing before they know the cold's coming, right?
Yeah. And then they, like some of the Kwijak River, those rainbows there, I guess they did some telemetry studies and they'll like swim like 30 miles in a day.
Jeez. Yeah. Because essentially there's a lot of overlap. They're steelhead trout rainbow. There's a lot of, they just don't go out into the ocean.
Yep.
Because they don't have to.
Yep.
So good. Well, this has been great today. Anything else we didn't cover today you want to give a heads up before we head out of here?
No, just enjoy your trip up here. Keep us posted.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, definitely. No, it's going to be awesome. We're really excited about getting up there. And Tim, we'll leave it there today. We'll send everybody out to salmonstate.org to connect with you. And like we said, they can sign up to the email. That might be an easy way just to get started and figure out what we can do to help support and hopefully protect some of the species. Thanks again for all your time.
Oh, thank you.
All right, what can you do? What can you do? I hope that got you stirred up a little bit and you're thinking about what you can do. Something easy you can do is sign up to the newsletter, the salmonstate.org right now, and they're going to send you some information on what's going on, where you can get involved. I think Bristol Bay was a good example. It's going to take that sort of effort to protect and recover, and probably more effort in getting the Chinook, recovered, and everything that we talked about today. So do that right now. One heads up, YouTube, wetflyswing.com/YouTube. If you're interested in checking us out on YouTube, we're just kind of relaunching the YouTube channel, and we've got some content there. We're also going to have some full-length episodes of this podcast there as we go, so stay tuned for that, and I would love to hear there if you get a chance to subscribe. Would really appreciate that. That helps us tons. All right, what do we have next? Let's take a look at what we have next. I'm just looking now. I'm scrolling down to the very bottom, and we are going to see, what do we got here? We got SalmonState. We got a lot of good stuff here. Here we go. So, yes, it is what I thought it was. So, Golden Dorado Week. We had to postpone it a little bit to get some of our episodes up and ready to go, but it looks like we do have Golden Dorado Week coming. So stay tuned for that. Set fly fishing, and we're going to be putting together a trip to the other side. We're talking Alaska here, but we're going to be heading down to South America, the other side of the Americas, and we're going to check that out too. So stay tuned for that. All right, I got to get out of here. Hope you have a great afternoon. Hope you have a wonderful evening or a fantastic morning. If it's morning, maybe you're just getting your cup of coffee. Maybe you saw this episode pop up and you're interested on, what you could do. Maybe you're in Alaska even having a cup of coffee. You got a river in your backyard. And maybe it's even Chinook time. I would love to hear a story from you if it is. If that's you, or if it's if you have a story for me, check in dave@wetflyswing.com. I want to give a shout out. The Steelhead School, we filled it up. That's going to be going strong here. We got the crew. I want to give a big shout out to Kevin. I know he just joined. He got access to that, so he's going to be heading there with Brian Niska, of course, in the Bucket Podcast, Jeff Liskay, Great Lakes Dude Podcast, and John McMillan. From the Deep Wade podcast, our brother from another mother, John McMillan, is going to be epic with Jeff on that trip. So I won't be there this year, but I think the trip is twice as good, if not 10 times as good, with those guys. So check it out. If you want to get access to next year's Steelhead School, the best chance is to go to Wet Fly Swing Pro. If you go to wetflyswing.com/pro, you can sign up there, and anybody that's in Pro gets first access to our trips and a whole bunch of other things where you can build trips together with the community. All right, like I said, we're getting out of here. Have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.